At 24 years old, Eliza Merrow arrived in Brindle Creek with mud on the hem of her only dress, $3 silver sewn into the lining of her coat, and no place in the world that would claim her. Her uncle, Silas Vale, had cast her out after accusing her of stealing from the family dry goods ledger, though every soul in Pine Hollow knew Silas had been bleeding that ledger dry for years. With those $3 and nothing more than a satchel of mending tools and her mother's brass thimble, Eliza bought the forgotten tannery on the south bank of Brindle Creek, a rotting stone and timber ruin no one wanted because of the sour smell still trapped in its walls and the old vats blackened by time. The men at the auction laughed when the deed was handed to her, for it seemed a desperate purchase by a desperate woman. But behind one bricked vat wall, sealed away where no honest eye had looked in 30 years, waited something that would not only change Eliza's life, but bring a wounded town back to itself. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Eliza Merrow. If you have ever stood beside something the world called worthless and still believed it had a soul, tell us where you are watching from. Eliza had been raised in Pine Hollow, a mill town tucked between two ridges of oak and a black pine, where the creek turned the wheel at Merrow and Vale Dry Goods, before winding past cornfields and into the wide western river beyond. Her father, Jonah Merrow, had been a quiet man with large hands and patient habits, the kind of man who could mend a torn harness, balance a ledger, and calm a frightened mule without raising his voice. Her mother, Ruth, had sewn gloves for railroad men and churchwomen alike, and she taught Eliza early that the strongest stitch was never the one people noticed. The hidden seam holds the garment, Ruth would say, guiding her daughter's small fingers through muslin by lamplight. Remember that, child. Most things stand because of what no one sees. So Eliza grew up noticing hidden things. She noticed when an old coat could be turned inside out and made useful again. She noticed when a tired woman at the counter counted coins twice before buying flour. She noticed when men praised charity in church, but docked wages on Monday morning. She noticed numbers, too, and by 15 she could run columns faster than her Uncle Silas, though he never admitted it. Her father trusted her with invoices, and her mother trusted her with repair work. And between the two of them, Eliza learned that survival was rarely loud. It was a needle through cloth, a pencil through figures, a hand steady enough to keep. Working while the world tried to shake it, the dry goods store was not grand, but it was respected. Farmers came for nails and molasses, miners for canvas and lamp oil, widows for thread, children for horehound candy kept in a cloudy jar near the register. Eliza knew the smell of that place better than she knew her own hair. Burlap sacks, cedar, crates, coffee beans, kerosene, boot leather, and the faint mineral dust that came in on every man's trousers. When her father lived, the store felt like a hearth. When he died, it became a room full of corners. Jonah Merrow was taken by fever. During an early spring when the creek ran high and yellow, Ruth followed less than a year later, not from fever, the doctor said, but from a heart worn too thin by loss. After that, Silas Vale, her mother's brother, and Jonah's former partner took full charge of the business. He had always dressed better than his means, with silver watch chains and polished cuffs, and he had a way of speaking kindly when others listened and sharply when they did not. He told the town he would keep Eliza on out of family duty. He told Eliza she ought to be grateful. Gratitude became a chain he expected her to wear. For 3 years, she worked from dawn to lamp out, keeping books, sweeping floors, receiving freight, writing orders, and mending torn sacks before they leaked sugar or beans across the storeroom. She slept in a narrow room behind the shop where winter wind came through the boards and mice nested in the wall. Silas paid her in meals and promises. "One day," he said, tapping the ledger with his ring finger, "all this may still benefit you if you learn loyalty." Eliza did learn loyalty, but not the kind he meant. She remained loyal to the numbers. She knew when entries had been changed. She knew when invoices were rewritten after suppliers left. She knew when store credit vanished from the accounts of poor families only to appear as unpaid debts. At first, she thought Silas was careless. Then she understood he was careful in the worst way. The first time she confronted him, she did it gently. It was a rain-dark morning, and the store was empty except for the ticking stove and the smell of wet wool. She laid 3 receipts beside the ledger and said, "Uncle, these figures do not match." He looked at her for a long time, not angry, yet only disappointed that she had become inconvenient. "You are young," he said. "Numbers sometimes confuse a tired mind." "They are not confused," she answered. His face changed then, not much, but enough. The kindness closed like a drawer. From that day forward, he watched her. He locked the ledger cabinet when he left the room. He sent her on errands when shipments arrived. He spoke of her to customers with a sigh, as though she were fragile and prone to mistakes. Slowly, carefully, he prepared the town to doubt her before she ever needed to be believed. The fall came in November, when the first frost silvered the wagon ruts and smoke settled low over Pine Hollow. A payment of $117 went missing from the safe, money collected for a shipment of winter blankets. Silas called in Marshal Brigg, then Reverend Holcomb, then half the town by the sheer force of his wounded performance. He opened the safe, displayed the empty envelope, and then asked Eliza to turn out her satchel. Inside were her sewing tools, her mother's thimble, 2 letters tied with blue thread, and 3 silver dollars. She had saved them 1 coin at a time from mending done secretly for women who paid her in private because Silas did not allow outside work. He lifted the coins as if they were proof of sin. "Where did a girl with no wages get these?" he asked. Eliza explained. The women who could have defended her lowered their eyes, not because they did not believe her, but because they owed money at the store and feared Silas's pen. Marshal Brigg shifted his hat from one hand to the other. Reverend Holcomb spoke of temptation. Silas spoke of disappointment. By evening, Eliza's name had been bent into a shape she could hardly recognize. He did not press charges. That was his final cruelty. Charges could have been answered. A trial could have brought records. Instead, he cast her out under the softer, deadlier sentence of suspicion. He gave her until morning to leave the back room. He kept her parents' store, their house, their accounts, and every object too large for her satchel. At dawn, she stood outside Marrow and Vale with frost on the road and her breath white before her. No one came to stop her. One woman, Mrs. Bell, left a biscuit wrapped in cloth near the pump and pretended not to see when Eliza took it. That kindness, small as it was, nearly broke her. We must understand this about Eliza. She did not leave Pine Hollow because she had no courage. She left because a town can become a locked door when the wrong man holds the key. For 2 weeks she walked and rode when wagoners allowed it, following the old freight road west. She slept in haylofts, church vestibules, and once beneath the broken bed of a bridge while rain drummed above her like thrown gravel. She mended gloves for a teamster's wife in exchange for coffee. She repaired a torn saddlebag for a peddler, who gave her a ride as far as Cold Ash Crossing. Each day, the 3 silver dollars remained sewn into her coat lining, not because she had no need of them, but because they were the last proof that she could still choose something. Brindle Creek appeared at the end of a gray afternoon, a town built around water, hides, and old disappointments. It sat low in a valley where the creek widened before joining the larger Parnell River. Years before, Brindle Creek had been known for leather, harness, boots, belts, saddles, machine straps for mills as far as Kansas City. The Tannery had employed half the town and offended the noses of the other half. Then came a fire, a lawsuit, a sickness people whispered about, and finally the railroad choosing a route 10 miles north. The town survived, but it did not prosper. Its houses leaned, its storefronts wore dust. Its people had the cautious look of those who had seen hope arrive before and charge too much. The auction was held beside the courthouse steps, though there was little worth bidding on. A rusted hayrake, 2 cracked stoves, a mule with one cloudy eye, and the Tannery property, which the county had seized for unpaid taxes after 30 years of abandonment. The auctioneer, Mr. Pruitt, read the description with visible distaste. Stone tannery building, adjoining shed, water rights uncertain, vats remaining, roof compromised, odor persistent. A few men chuckled. "What am I offered?" Pruitt called. No one spoke. $10? Silence. 5? A man near the hitching rail said, "Pay me 5 and I might take it." More laughter. Eliza stood at the edge of the crowd with her satchel in hand. She had meant only to watch, perhaps find work, perhaps ask at the boarding house. But the word water had caught her. Water rights uncertain. A building beside water, stone walls. A roof, even compromised, was still more than the sky. $3, she said. The laughter faded into surprise, then returned louder. Mr. Pruitt peered at her. "Miss, the county will accept legal tender, not pity." Eliza reached into her coat lining and pulled the coins. Free, one by one, they shone in her palm like small moons. $3, she repeated. No one bid against her. No one was foolish enough, they thought. When the deed was signed, the clerk misspelled her name and had to blot the page. A boy whispered, "She bought the stink house." A woman shook her head. A man said, "She won't last a week." But Eliza folded the deed carefully and placed it beside her mother's thimble. The tannery stood south of town, where the road dipped toward the creek. It was larger than she expected, a long stone building with timber additions sagging from one side, its roof patched by moss and weather, its windows broken or boarded. Vines had climbed the walls, and entered through cracks. The old sign still hung crooked above the main doors, the paint nearly gone. Brindle Creek Leather Works. Behind it, the creek moved dark and steady, turning past the collapsed wheel race, where water had once powered machinery. Inside, the air held the sour ghost of lime, bark, wet hides, smoke, and abandonment. Most people would have turned away. Eliza stepped in. Dust lay thick across the floor. Raccoon tracks crossed old papers. Sunlight entered in blades through roof gaps and fell across rows of tanning vats, some open, some covered by warped planks. The vats were great rectangular pits lined with brick and stone, stained black from years of bark liquor. Along the far wall stood a series of larger vats used, perhaps, for soaking hides. One had been partially bricked over, its wall newer than the rest, though still old enough to wear moss in the mortar. At first she noticed it only because hidden seams had trained her eyes. The brickwork behind the third vat did not match. Its courses were too even. Its mortar was smoother. Someone had closed that section deliberately, but not recently. She ran her fingers over the wall and felt a faint draft. That first night she slept in the office on a bed made from old burlap in her coat. Rats moved in the walls. The creek whispered beyond the stones. She should have been afraid, but fear requires expectation, and Eliza had lost nearly everything fear could threaten. Near midnight, rain began, and water tapped through roof holes into buckets she had set out. She listened to each drop and thought of her mother's words. The hidden seam holds the garment. In the morning, she began cleaning. There is a dignity in work no crowd can laugh away. Eliza swept glass. She dragged rotten boards into piles. She opened shutters and let the tannery breathe for the first time in decades. She found old tools, fleshing knives, wooden paddles, rusted hooks, iron scrapers, a mallet with a split handle. In the office desk, beneath mouse-chewed invoices, she found a brass key blackened with age and a brittle scrap of paper bearing 3 words in faded ink. Not the hides. That was the first clue. Not the hides. She read it again and felt the room sharpen around her. The paper had been torn from a ledger. On the back were initials. A.B. She searched the office for the matching book, but most records had been ruined by damp. In a cabinet swollen shut, she found stacks of old shipping labels. From 1871, the year the tannery closed. Many were marked for leather belts and harness, but some bore strange notations in the margin. Church fund, widow shares, school roof, doctor account. These were not ordinary business marks. They looked like obligations, promises. By the 3rd day, townspeople began appearing at the road to watch her work. Children came first, daring one another to touch the gate. Then men came, pretending to inspect the creek. Then women came with baskets, saying they had only been passing. Eliza accepted no pity, but she accepted trade. A loaf of bread for mending, a jar of beans for repairing a torn apron. A broom borrowed from Mrs. Lark, the boarding house keeper, in exchange for stitching sheets. Slowly, Brindle Creek learned that the foolish girl in the tannery did not beg. She worked. One afternoon, An old man named Tobias Rill came down the road with a cane and a tobacco-colored coat. He had once been a beam house worker, he told her, back when the tannery ran day and night. His left hand was missing 2 fingers from an accident with a hide press. "You ought not disturb that place too much," he said. Eliza looked up from clearing debris near the bricked vat wall. Because of the smell? Because of what men buried with the smell. She waited. Tobias watched the wall, not her. Arthur Bell owned this tannery. Hard man, fairer than some, meaner than most. But his wife, Miriam, she kept another kind of book. Miriam Bell? Eliza asked, thinking of the initials A.B. on the scrap. Arthur Bell, Tobias said. Miriam did the quiet work. When the flood of '68 took the lower cabins, she collected wages from men willing to give. When the fever came, she paid the doctor for families who couldn't. When the school roof failed, she kept the children dry. Folks thought Arthur gave that money. He let them think it. What happened? The old man's mouth tightened. Panic. Fire in the drying loft. Then talk that Arthur had cheated investors and hidden money before the creditors came. County men searched the office, the sheds, the house, found nothing. Arthur left by night. Miriam died before winter. The tannery closed. People who had trusted them lost wages, savings, burial money. Brindle Creek never got its back straight after that. Did anyone search behind the vats? Tobias turned his eyes to her then. No, he said softly. No one searched where the stink was worst. After he left, Eliza stood before the bricked wall for a long while. The newer mortar ran from floor to ceiling behind the third soaking vat. If something had been hidden there, it had been hidden in the one place no polite official would willingly break open. The vat still held a crust of old lime and black residue. Its edges were slick with age, but behind the wall, the draft remained. She worked for 2 more days before attempting it. She borrowed a cold chisel from the livery, traded mending for a heavier hammer, and waited until evening when no curious eyes watched from the road. Then, by lantern light, she climbed into the dry vat, wrapped her skirt high, and began tapping. The mortar, the sound told the truth before the wall did. Most bricks answered dull and solid, but near the lower right corner came a hollow note. She struck there first. Mortar cracked. Dust fell. Her hands blistered, then opened. She wrapped them in cloth and kept working. Brick by brick, the sealed section loosened. Behind it lay not a room, but a narrow cavity built between the vat wall and the outer stone foundation, just wide enough to conceal something long and square. Eliza held the lantern close. Inside was a crate wrapped in oilcloth and bound with iron straps. Her breath caught. The brass key from the office fit the lock. When the lid opened, she did not find gold coins glittering like fairy tales. She found ledgers, letters, rolled deeds, a child's primer, a silver communion cup, a bundle of wage envelopes hardened with age, and a small leather pouch containing 27 double eagles. Beneath them all lay a folded map of Brindle Creek, with certain properties marked in red ink: widow cabins, schoolhouse, churchyard, lower bridge, workers' row, colored cemetery, and tannery water easement. On top was a letter addressed in a woman's hand to the one who finds what Arthur could not bring himself to return. Eliza sat in the empty vat with the lantern trembling beside her and read Miriam Bell's confession. Miriam had not stolen from the town. Arthur had. Over years, he had taken money collected for relief funds, widow pensions, school repairs, and worker shares, hiding it in the tannery accounts under shipments that never existed. When creditors came, he planned to flee with everything. Miriam discovered the false books and, unable to expose him before he could destroy the evidence, sealed the proof behind the vat wall with the help of one trusted mason, Abel Crow, whose initials marked the torn scrap Eliza had found. She hid enough coin to begin repayment, but more importantly, she hid the ledgers proving which families had been wronged and which lands had been purchased with stolen community funds. "If I cannot live long enough to set this right," Miriam wrote, "let truth outlive me." There are moments when a person's whole life seems to lean toward one task. Eliza, who had been cast out over a false ledger, now held a true one. Eliza, who had lost her name to a thief's accusation, now held the means to restore names long buried beneath another man's greed. She did not sleep that night. She sorted papers until dawn, matching wage envelopes to names, reading letters from women asking for school books, from miners asking after burial dues, from a preacher requesting roof money, from a freedman named Josiah Reed, asking why payments for the cemetery fence had vanished, though every family had contributed. By morning, Brindle Creek was no longer merely the town where she had bought a ruin. It was a town with a wound, and the wound had been bricked behind her wall. But truth, as we know, is rarely welcomed by those who have profited from silence. The first person she told was Tobias Rill. He wept without making a sound when he saw the wage envelopes. His brother's name was on one. His mother's cabin was marked in red on the map. The second person she told was Mrs. Lark, who crossed herself when she saw the communion cup. "That belonged to the old chapel," she whispered. "They said it was lost in the fire." The third person she told was Judge Halvern, who had been in Brindle Creek only 6 years and owed no loyalty to old lies. He examined the ledgers for a full afternoon, his spectacles low on his nose, his finger moving across the columns. When he finished, he said, "Miss Marrow, do you understand what you have here?" "I think I do." "You have evidence that several parcels in this town were purchased with misappropriated funds. You also have proof of unpaid wages and charitable theft. Can it be restored?" The judge looked toward the tannery window where children had gathered near the creek. "Legally, some of it will be difficult. Morally, it is plain as sunrise. News spread by supper." By the next morning, Brindle Creek had divided into those who wanted the truth read aloud and those who wanted it handled quietly. The loudest among the second group was Councilman Ezra Pike, owner of the largest warehouse in town, a man with a square beard and a habit of resting both hands on his belly when speaking. His father had acquired much of the lower bank after the tannery closed. Several red marks on Miriam's map touched land now controlled by Pike Freight and Storage. He came to the tannery with 2 men behind him and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Miss Marrow," he said, "you have stirred up considerable emotion. Truth often does. Truth without context is a dangerous instrument. So is a ledger in dishonest hands." His smile thinned. "You are new here. I am familiar with men who say that before asking a woman to be quiet." One of the men behind him snorted. Pike did not. He offered to buy the tannery for $50, then $100. Then he suggested the building was unsafe and could be condemned. By evening, someone had thrown a stone through the office window. The next day, a notice appeared on the door claiming unpaid structural fines. Judge Halvern tore it down himself. Then came the worst thing. A letter arrived from Pine Hollow, addressed to the Brindle Creek Council. Silas Vale had heard of Eliza's discovery through freight gossip, and he wrote that his niece was a known thief and unstable young woman with a habit of falsifying accounts. He urged the town to protect itself from embarrassment. For a few hours, the old shadow reached her. Eliza read the letter once, then folded it carefully. Her hands shook, but not from fear alone. There is a particular cruelty in being accused twice by the same kind of lie. Mrs. Lark wanted to burn it. Tobias wanted to send men to Pine Hollow. Judge Halvern wanted documentation. Eliza gave him documentation. From her satchel, she removed the 2 letters tied in blue thread. One was from Mrs. Bell of Pine Hollow, written secretly after Eliza had left, confessing that Silas had pressured her to deny paying Eliza for mending. The other was from a supplier in Cold Ash Crossing, confirming that Silas had altered invoices for years. Eliza had carried them not as weapons, but as proof to herself that she had not imagined the truth. Judge Halvern read them and said, "Then we shall invite Mr. Vale to Brindle Creek." Silas came 3 days later in a polished carriage, wearing his silver watch chain and the expression of a man arriving to rescue lesser minds from confusion. He did not expect a packed town hall. He did not expect Miriam Bell's ledgers laid across the front table. He did not expect Eliza standing beside Judge Halvern, calm as a seam pulled straight. The hall smelled of lamp oil, damp wool, and anticipation. Families whose names appeared in the books sat shoulder to shoulder. Old workers leaned on canes. Children crowded windows. Councilman Pike sat stiffly near the front, his face the color of unbaked dough. Judge Halvern began with the Tannery records. He read names, amounts, dates. He read Miriam's letter. He read the land map. With every line, the room changed. People who had inherited shame discovered theft. People who had blamed dead parents for losing cabins discovered forged transfers. People who had thought poverty was proof of failure saw at last the hands that had pushed them there. Then the judge read Silas Vale's accusation against Eliza. Silas stood, smiling sadly. "I regret family matters being aired in public." "So, does truth," Eliza said quietly. "But it comes anyway." She presented the supplier letter. Then Mrs. Bell's confession. Then, from Miriam's ledger, she explained the same method Silas had used in Pine Hollow. False shipments altered. Credits, debts assigned to those least able to challenge them. She did not shout. She did not call him names. She simply laid one column beside another and let arithmetic do what anger could not. By the end, Silas Vale had no speech left large enough to hide behind. Quiet justice does not always arrive with chains. Sometimes it arrives as silence in a Room where a liar has run out of air. Judge Halvern ordered copies of the evidence sent to Pine Hollow authorities. Pike's disputed land claims were frozen. The Tannery property, by virtue of legal purchase, remained Eliza's, but she petitioned to place the water easement and lower bank parcels into a public trust using Miriam's ledgers as basis. The 27 double eagles, though legally hers as finder and owner of the property, she refused to keep for herself. "Use it first for the school roof," she said. "Then the cemetery fence, then worker families still living." Mrs. Lark objected. "Child, you need money." "I need a town that knows what was stolen from it," Eliza answered. "Money can come after." But Brindle Creek did not let her give everything away and remain poor. The women organized repairs at the tannery. Men who had mocked her patched the roof without meeting her eyes. Tobias brought old tools and taught boys how bark mills once worked. The school teacher, Miss Alma Reed, granddaughter of Josiah Reed, helped Eliza turn the front office into a records room where families could read copies of Miriam's ledger. Within months, the old tannery no longer smelled of rot. It smelled of scraped wood, lime wash, coffee, paper, and work. Eliza did not reopen it as a tannery. She knew too much sorrow had soaked into those vats. Instead, she founded the Brindle Creek Leather Cooperative and Repair House, where old harness was mended, boots resoled, saddlebags stitched, and young people taught trades that did not require leaving town. The vats were cleaned and covered. One, the third soaking vat, was left open behind a railing, the broken brick wall preserved so no one would forget where truth had been hidden. The school roof was repaired before winter. The cemetery fence was raised by spring. The lower bridge, long unsafe, was rebuilt with timber donated by families whose names Miriam had protected. Land wrongfully absorbed into Pike's holdings was returned in portions where law allowed and where law did not. Pike paid settlements rather than face trial that would expose his father's papers further. His warehouse remained, but his voice in town shrank. As for Silas Vale, word came by summer that Marrow and Vale dry goods had been placed under investigation. Creditors appeared. Customers demanded account reviews. The silver watch chain disappeared first, then the carriage, then the sign above the store was taken down. No one in Brindle Creek cheered when Eliza heard. She did not smile. She only sat for a while beside the creek, her mother's thimble in her palm, and let the water carry the old hurt somewhere it could thin. One evening, nearly a year after the auction, Tobias Rill found her standing in the tannery doorway as sunset turned the creek copper. "You ever think of going back?" he asked. "To Pine Hollow?" He nodded. Eliza watched two girls inside the repair house learning to stitch leather under Miss Reed's guidance. One frowned fiercely at her crooked seam. The other whispered encouragement. "No," Eliza said. "That was where I was removed from. This is where I was put." Tobias smiled at that, and neither of them spoke for a long time. We began with a young woman of 24, penniless but for $3 silver, cast out by a man who believed a false ledger could bury her. We followed her to a forgotten tannery on the south bank of Brindle Creek, a place everyone dismissed because it was ugly, sour, and inconvenient. She bought it because it was all she could afford. She stayed because she saw what others refused to see. And when she opened the wall behind the vat, she did not find a simple treasure meant to make one person rich. She found a town's stolen memory. That is the part worth remembering. The world often hides its most necessary truths in places polite people avoid. Behind stains, behind bad smells, behind shame, behind names others have written off. Eliza Marrow could have taken Miriam Bell's coins and disappeared into comfort, and perhaps few would have blamed her. But she understood what men like Silas Vale and Arthur Bell never did. Value is not proven by possession. It is proven by restoration. A dollar kept can feed one person for a day. A truth returned can feed dignity for generations. So the forgotten Tannery became a school of hands and history. The bricked wall became a witness. And Eliza, who arrived with nothing but $3 and a name nearly ruined by lies, became the woman who taught Brindle Creek that some things are not worthless, simply because they have been abandoned. Sometimes they are waiting for the right hands to open them. Thank you for settling in with us for the story of Eliza Marrow and the forgotten tannery of Brindle Creek. If this tale moved you, share it with someone who still believes old places and quiet people can hold extraordinary worth. And tell us in the comments, what is a time you found value in something others had written off? We read your reflections, and they help keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay close